Please welcome to the stage, Deidre Merriweather, CFO of Granger, LaTanya White, Principal and Founder of Latanda WitBiz.
So thank you, Lori, for that introduction. I know there's a series of questions and Q&A I believe we're going to go through, but I would just like to start with a few comments related to focusing on building, in my words, generational wealth. And that starts with each individual. Some key tips I would say, if you think about where I started my career, I'm originally from Michigan. I am a daughter of two parents who worked in the automotive industry. Neither had, advanced education, but they had great common sense, and they cared about myself and my brother and what our future would be like. They created a stable home environment, and they showed us what it meant to actually be able to buy a home and have credit, which were great examples, specifically, for me. And my mom started off with a very simple tactic with my brother and myself, which was having a savings account. You know, they lived pretty much from check to check, even though they were able to buy a home, but they were very focused on ensuring that me and my brother understood what banking meant in the world, and what it meant to actually have availability to cash and assets, and how you could use those assets to help build wealth. And that even went back even further to my grandfather, who was a janitor at General Motors, who actually bought his own home, and he bought a 2-family flat and rented out the other side. And we still have that home in our family, as well as other real estate assets. Now, we're not real estate moguls, and myself and all my cousins went on to do other things, mostly starting in the engineering field. But we all have some basic things that were very key to all of us. We all own homes. We all have additional properties. So we have a secondary source of income. And we've all have been very focused on education and on advancement. Those are some basic things that I think we should all consider, and all start from that level if you haven't already, or at least considering that. It is really the key to beginning. And from there, you become much more comfortable. You live within your means, not above your means, and you prioritize saving money and hopefully investing those dollars so that you can pass on assets throughout the generations, to ensure that you build that wealth while you're living, but also, for those who come after you. And I would be remiss in stating that along the way, also helping others to do the same thing. As a CFO at Granger, I don't invest other people's money, but I am responsible for the financials of WW Granger and ensuring that we have financial stability. But I spend time with all of my team members that I mentor, and part of that mentorship includes financial mentorship. I am still surprised by some of our vice presidents that I've run into either here or at Granger, or at other companies, that may not have an IRA still. They're making hundreds of thousands of dollars. They're not prioritizing savings for themselves or for their families, but they're very focused on material items, instead of the items in my mind that really are material and that matter, which is actually making sure that they have access and their family has access to cash, and so that they could live through downturns and upturns. So my key message is, this is a great opportunity for you to take time to reflect on what you are doing. You don't have to tell anyone what you're doing, what you're not doing, but think about that today. And if you're not doing what you should, if you still are living with a lot of debt, if you don't have a lot of savings, If you don't have a financial advisor where you are investing, make that change today with what you have and start with a plan that includes your family. And if your family is just a child, or if your family is a spouse, or if your family is your parent, take that plan and agree on that plan and start making progress and building wealth for yourself and for your family today.
Thank you so much, Dee, for sharing that. I'd like to add a, a different dimension to the conversation as as we prepare to get into the question. So, hi everyone, I'm Dr. Latanya White. I actually come to you today. Just want to share a little bit about my positionality. I taught entrepreneurship on the highest of seven hills at Florida A&M University for 11 years. I taught entrepreneurship, principles of management, and professional leadership development courses in the School of Business at FAMU. And maybe about 4 or 5 years into teaching the entrepreneurship class, which if you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll see me talking about entrepreneurship as my love language, because I see it as this accelerated pathway to wealth building and wealth transfer. It's not to say that it's the only pathway, but there is research that I conducted in my doctoral journey that showed that re- when you control for race, so a Black family and a white family who are employed or are entrepreneurial, either family will reach this wealth status just quicker because of different things that they do with the money that they make. And so, Dee, you opened up talking about generational wealth. One of the things that I came across was this construct that goes just a bit beyond generational wealth. And it focuses on three consecutive generations. It focuses on four directions of wealth transfer. And probably most importantly, there are five forms of wealth that our high net worth and our ultra high net worth counterparts are cultivating and passing down in their families. And so that's dynastic wealth. That's this framework for how do we involve the family, right? How do we involve the family in the wealth building and the wealth transfer process? How do I ensure that by the time my grandchildren are fully capable of controlling and running a business, that they aren't starting from scratch, which is what I found from a lot of the Black founders that I interviewed for my dissertation. They all felt like they were starting from scratch. And so this is our time now to change that narrative. There are so many opportunities that are unfolding before us as a people, as a culture, as in the global diaspora. But this is our time to ensure that 3 generations from now, they know the shoulders that they stand on, because they can point to it in their family history, in their family constitution, in their family trust, and that no one is feeling like they're starting from scratch. So I'd really just love to share that as we get into the questions, and looking forward to doing that. Perfect. So we have a note from the production team. So we'll be looking forward to the any audience questions. But Deidre, if I can, I know we have some that we gotten from the internal team. So what's your origin story? I know you started a little bit with where you are now, but how did you get here? How did you find yourself in this role?
Sure. Well, I'm an engineer, people say by trade. So my undergrad degree is in chemical engineering. And that happened because I had some other cousins who were engineers, and thought I had good math skills and kind of pushed me to go into engineering with them. So, that's how I started my career. And I started at Eli Lilly in Indianapolis, and I moved on and became a production engineer. But I started to see the people that were making the decisions, were on the business side. And I thought to myself, well, if I'm an engineer, I think I could probably do what they're doing. And so I went back to pursue an MBA at Kelley School of Business at IU. My undergrad is at A&T, North Carolina A&T, and really liked my finance classes more than I thought I would like them. and then joined Price Waterhouse, who's an accounting firm, and in their Fast Track to Partner program, and thought I was just going to go and do deals. I moved over to the acquisition side. I thought that was really exciting. But I was like, well, maybe I could go work for a corporation with these skills and won't need to do all the travel, and can do something similar. And ended up working for Kmart at the time and helping them go into bankruptcy, come out, was the project manager when Kmart acquired Sears. Most people think it was the other way around, but Kmart acquired Sears. And when I look back, I've spent about half of my time in general management or operations, and then about half the time in finance. And so that's how that happened. I feel like I built a broad set of skills, whether it's running a DC, I ran a pharmacy business within Kmart, I ran global purchasing. And from time to time, people would ask me to go back on the financial side. I ended up at Granger in a succession role to the CFO here. And again, when he left, I had moved back over to the business, and then they asked me to come back to become the CFO. So I wasn't quite sure if I was going to end up on the business side within a corporation or a financial side. It was a hard choice for me a little bit over 2 years ago, actually, to take this role because I was leading our North American business, and I really like that, and I like that challenge. But that's how I ended up here career-wise.
That's great because the questions have started coming in.
Okay.
So you providing that really gives us some context to be able to answer some of the questions. So you're able to see them in the chat as
I
well.
can, yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. So the first question is, what is considered a lot of savings? I think that's relative, right, to the person. I mean, if you don't make a lot of money and you're saving, I don't know, $50 a month, that's a lot. That might be a lot of savings for you. But if you're making, $1 million, you better not be saving $50 a month. You actually, right?
Right.
So as I think about it, I think there's a rule of thumb that I kind of grew up on and everybody else grew up on. You want to have several months of your base pay saved, or total income kind of saved up for, rainy day or any kind of challenge. Now, don't just let that money sit though. Make sure that you are earning either some interest or have those dollars invested, for your retirement or to help you with a goal. I think that's why you start off with, what is your goal? What goal are you trying to achieve? If your goal is just to buy a car because you don't have one, that's a different goal than trying to buy a home or to send your kids, help your kids go to college. So I think you begin with an end in mind, which is your goal. And then you back up from there and figure out, well, how much time do I have to achieve that goal? And then you just do the math on how much you should be saving.
I love that you said begin with the end in mind. I think that really is the basis of several of the other questions that we'll address in the chat. And one of the things about dynastic wealth is that we are looking 60 years down the line, right? So most generational cohorts are between 20 to 25 years. And I'm talking about 3 generations. So if we think about what do we need our grandchildren to be, what kind of economic opportunities do we want our
Right.
grandchildren to have, that really can determine in your day-to-day spending and how you run your business, how you invest. Is it stock? Is it, whole life insurance? That I think that really is determined based on that end in mind that you referred to. Um, so this next question, how do you know when to start a trust? I think the minute you hear the word and you begin to do your research is the opportunity for you to really go down that pathway. I work with an estate planning attorney. She's come and she's spoken with my family and has worked with some of the Black families that I work with. And one of the things that she's really adamant about, Attorney Jamie Coleman down in Florida, one of the things that she's really adamant about is that we have assets right now. We tend as a culture sometimes to think that we have to be at a certain level of status. We have to be at a certain level of savings or of wealth to be eligible to start a trust. But a trust is a vehicle that protects your assets. And so the assets that you're generating every day need protection. If it's not a will, and this is one of Attorney Coleman's, if you don't have a will, your state has one for you. And you want to make sure that your family is provided with the avenues to get access to those assets that you are working so hard to create. And so the trust is a vehicle to ensure that it gets passed to them without going through probate and things of that nature. So today is when you want to start doing your research about establishing your trust. Any thoughts on that, Dee?
No, I agree with you. Never too soon nor too late to actually start and to think about that. And I'll just give a quick example. I have a grandson, and I am helping save for his education through a trust vehicle because my son and his wife are not going to be together. And I want to make sure his assets are protected regardless of how their relationship turns out, as an example, right? Mhm.
I love that. Do you have any thoughts on how to select a financial advisor or some things that you look for in your own journey?
Yeah, so I have a story again, and I was still in operations at the time, and our COO was a pretty wealthy gentleman, and he gave me some time every now and then. And most of the time, when I started my relationship, with him, trying to learn about how to advance and how to work within a corporate environment, it was mostly business. But one-on-one, I gave him a heads up, and I said, I really would like to understand, you know who you use to invest your money because you have a lot of it. And so he was just like, sure, I'd be happy to talk to you about that. And and kind of what he does. And so he kind of sat me down and shared a lot. And he's like, I'll introduce you to my advisor, but I'll be honest with you, you have to have a significant amount of money to work with him. Well, at the time I didn't have enough. And so one of my goals became, how do I build enough um, cash and assets to work with an advisor like Bill had. His name was Bill, because it gave Bill access to other investment vehicles that individuals traditionally don't have. How do you get in on early cycle companies, that could go through an IPO and become an investor for that? It's harder to do that, through some Wall Street vehicle or advisor. And so I ended up eventually working with his financial advisor. I work with a couple actually, because I believe in diversification for real, not just in the vehicle that I invest in, but the banks that I have, as you think about the current crisis that's going on with banking, the banks that I have my dollars in and the vehicles that they have in and who actually helps me with that. And here's the other tip. I also ask them every year to share with me what their fees are, because it's hard to actually see how much money the advisor is making because it all goes through in fees. And then that also helps me figure out how to balance my dollars among those advisors based upon the returns I'm getting and the fees that they are charging. So I would say, you could start off with someone, at your, local bank, JP Morgan Chase or Bank of America, things like that, get started. But also try to build relationships with people that are in the advisement space. And the number one thing is, make sure they know what the hell they're talking about. 2, you trust them. And then 3, look at the returns you're getting. And if you're not happy with them, don't be hesitant in moving your money.
Oh, I love that. And I'd like to share just another dimension to that. So I conducted my conducted my dissertation research on the correlation between Black entrepreneurship and the racial wealth gap. And coming across, Traffic, Sales, and Profit with Lamar Tyler. There's, of course, Earn Your Leisure, Wall Street Trapper, like all of the thought leaders in the cultural space, right? In this cultural perspective. So one of the places where I landed with my research was, although I had been teaching entrepreneurship for 11 years, I was teaching entrepreneurship the way it was taught to me through a white male paradigm. And so I got to this place where I realized that for as excited as I was about my students and my clients and the ideas that they had, I saw more in them that they allowed themselves to see in themselves. And so I got to this place where it's like, well, what happened to the lived experience of the Black entrepreneur, of Black professionals, of Black families in this wealth building journey? And so one of the things that I like to add to that question, or in response to that question, is I, to the extent possible, every dollar that I spend is a Black dollar. So one of the things that I would also advise is that you look for people who have similar values, not just about money or about wealth and wealth transfer. And that doesn't always mean that they look like us. They might be an ally, but make sure that the values are aligned, right? And it really depends on how you approach your relationship with money and your relationship with wealth. But one of the things that I can say is, for every product, service, solution that we are seeking, there is someone in our community that can provide it as well. So first people that come to mind from a financial advising standpoint is Freeman Capital. So I think Freeman Capital was like a Techstars company, Google for startups, all of those kinds of things. Very well versed in the financial industry, but may not be as amplified, right? They may not be as well known as our JP Morgan Chases and the others. So there are also opportunities to really amplify the impact of the Black dollar in support of Black subject matter experts in these areas as well. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. So
There's a question here about the 4 directions of wealth. I think you should take that one. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the opportunity. So again, dynastic wealth different from generational wealth in these 3 very distinct areas. And one is those 3 consecutive generations. In the private wealth industry, there is this saying, this anecdote that goes shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. And that essentially, and it's not just in America, there is a Korean translation of it. There is a Nigerian translation of this phenomenon that happens when it comes to wealth transfer. So it's saying that the first generation is literally rolling up their shirt sleeves, building these businesses, building these pathways to wealth, and really, as the kids say these days, getting it out the mud, right? So that second generation, as the beneficiary, tends to certainly have better opportunities. They have different lifestyle experiences, but because they aren't being actively engaged in the wealth development and wealth creation process, they essentially, there's nothing to show for it. So that by the 3rd generation, they're starting from scratch. And that is kind of the basis of where you get this definition for what creates a family dynasty. And that's 3 consecutive generations of control of either a business or wealth. Now, those 4 directions of the transfer of wealth, where in generational wealth, we're typically talking about from me to my daughter, or in your case, you to your grandson, right? That is just one direction, and that's down. With dynastic wealth, I can transfer wealth to my cousins, right? To my sister. But I think what's most impactful for me, and my family and I have been working on this for 3 years, I found ways to transfer wealth up, not just to my mom, but to my aunts and uncles and to my grandmother. So my grandmother's 90 years old. We all get on Zoom twice a week, and I'm able to transfer wealth up to her. And so what's most important about the directionality of this transfer of wealth is the types of wealth transfer. So it's not just quantifiable, it's not just financial wealth. There are these four qualitative forms of wealth that is really the vehicle through which wealth transfer is perpetuated. There's spiritual wealth, which is not based in religion, but it's really the fact that as a family, right, we have this identity. Like these are our values as a family. This is what we want 3 and 5 and 7 generations of our family to know who we were. And so that's that spiritual wealth, saying we're working towards something greater than just money. There is the wealth of knowledge, some family recipes and oral histories and heirs property, right? Like whose name is on the deed to grandma's house down in the low country, like those kinds of things. Like our families have lost so much wealth, financial wealth, because we didn't document. Sometimes we didn't have the opportunities to document the knowledge of wealth. And we also are able to invest in intellectual wealth and pass down relational wealth, which are our relationships, our social capital, the opening of doors and things of that nature. So the four directions of wealth don't have as much impact, or without having the context of the 5 different types of wealth.
Let's see, there's another question in here about what's your advice on how to educate and engage your children on financial literacy?
You start that one off, Dee.
Yeah. Well, I have to use the example my mother gave, which I have just tried to perpetuate. I'll be honest with you. I perpetuated it with my son, and I've done it with my grandson when I literally took him with me when he was 4, to open up a joint account between me and him. And, generally, anytime he gets something, I sit down and have a conversation, especially if it's like a gift card or if somebody gives him some money. My mom and his other grandparents, our great grandparents, give him like $2 bills, or unique coins. And then, so we got him a piggy bank, to help him understand and help him get in the habit of putting it in a bank and not saying, I want to spend it on gum, candy, or video games. And, I have him go to the bank. I have him sign things. I have him go through the rituals kind of with me of that. And then when the statement comes, I have him open it because he can see that the mail has his name on it. And then he's 5 now. We look at how much that is. And we talk about, what are you going to do with it? And so now he's become accustomed to understanding that when he receives money or something, he kind of looks at me and says, ask himself the question of what am I going to do with this, or ask me what is he going to do with it. And he says he's going to put it in the bank. He's going to save it. And then he's starting to understand that you can treat yourself, like birthdays or, Christmas and stuff like that. But he wants to share. It's helped him thinking about sharing. Sharing is caring, how to share wealth and money, and that he needs to think about saving money for school. He understands what stuff costs. Like, I'll take him to the grocery store and I'll be like, look how much this costs versus how much money you have in your piggy bank. And then he'll get a look on himself like, well, how are we going to make up the difference? And I'm like, right, we got to work. We have to work, in order to do these things. And so those are just some small things that I have done. I did it with my son, and I'm trying to do it with my grandson to introduce him. And I'm just going to keep advancing that the older he gets, So those are some things that I'm doing.
I love that. And to that question, what advice do we have to educate and engage our children on financial literacy? We don't have to leave out like our moms and sisters and aunts and uncles in that conversation about financial literacy. One other thing that I came across in this construct and framework for dynastic wealth is the family retreats. So I was just watching an episode of Bel Air. It's the remake of Will Smith, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and there was the episode they were having their reunion. And I talk about this all the time. in my family, we have our family reunion every other year, and every other year we're racing around trying to get money for t-shirts. And did you get your ticket to the Sunday scholarship banquet and
Right.
everything like that? But our counterparts, here again, right? We're talking about a minimum of three generations of wealth transfer. They use those family gatherings as business meetings. Those family retreats, they're looking at their investment portfolio. They have, and every generation of the family is involved. So there are four generations in my family. And as we prepare for our first family retreat, my daughter, who's 8 years old, and her cousins, they will be responsible for, really opening the retreat and reading the family constitution. But then they go into a session on, well, it may have been lemonade stands back in the day, but now it's probably artificial intelligence and cryptocurrency. So they're being exposed to financial literacy in a context that makes sense for
For
them
them.
and where they are in their learning
Hmm.
stage.
Hmm.
Where my cousins and I, we're looking at our family investment portfolio. Where did we put our money? What did we learn? What did we lose? Where do
Hmm.
we go next year? And then my mom and siblings, that generation, they're really looking at succession planning. And if Tanya made a request from the family bank, did she meet the criteria? Has she been involved? Like all of those kinds of things. So there are these different ways that teaching financial literacy shows up depending on the generational cohort. And it doesn't just have to be our children, because a lot of times, and I think we may be preaching to the choir, we have some students that are in the K-12 pipeline who might learn about financial literacy in school or in their enrichment activities, but don't have the support at home.
Right.
So the conversation stops, and it may be, how do we support those children as we are, this rising tide that lifts all boats, as
Hmm.
we're doing the work in our own homes? How do we ensure that our children are connected to gets the same or similar support?
Hmm. I agree.
Yeah.
And again, like in my, opening comments, you have people that are pretty high up and pretty well paid that still aren't doing the things that they need to do to build wealth. And I think people have this
Mhm.
imposter syndrome, or they are nervous about sharing that maybe they aren't as far enough along in their journey, in their wealth building journey, and they don't want people to know. That's the worst thing. It's like, don't worry about that. Ask questions, be on a call like this, get the help you need to make sure that you start
Mhm.
making the right decisions wherever
Mhm.
you are on this spectrum. And don't worry about the fact that you didn't start as soon as you should have. You got to get started now. I think we continue to have some technical difficulties. I keep seeing people go away. Um, I think we have another question. I could try to take that question. Um, so another question is, how do you ensure that an advisor can be trusted? Well, there's certification for a financial advisor, so I would look for some certification for sure. And I would do it just like you, or I would focus on selecting that advisor just like you would selecting anything else. I would interview people. I would ask them for references, other people that they have worked with, especially if you know someone already that is working with them. Of course, that's how I got my lead, from someone who I trusted. So I think word of mouth, and um, Latanya talked about, she gave you a reference of a African American based firm. There are a number of them out there. Google is a great thing. You can search online and try to get some references. But I would interview them just like you would for any other service that you are looking to spend your money at, and make sure that they're accredited, in some way. And I mean, like, really ask some questions. I don't know if there was a bank commercial. Now I can't remember the bank, but it was a young girl that kept asking why, asking the person questions. And I think that's what you should do. How do you invest? What are your fees? What is your structure? What is your track record? What is your track record? Um, and can I get some references if you don't know anybody?
That is great. I completely agree. And thank you, since my Wi-Fi is being very fickle today, for holding it down.
Yes. Okay.
So I think it says we have about 7 more minutes. So let's make sure we address as many of the questions as possible. There was one question about debt. I'm not sure if
Mhm.
we got to that one. If you already have some debt due to unforeseen circumstances, what's the best way to right the ship?
Mhm.
You have any thoughts on that, Dee,
Why don't you
that you'd
get
like to
started?
discuss?
Then I'll
Okay,
get. Then I'll
okay.
follow. Yeah.
Okay, okay. Well, I think being able to recognize, right? Because it's a scary and intimidating thing to think that out of all the information that I still found myself in this place with debt. And let's be clear, there's good debt. There is a such thing as good debt. And
Mhm.
there, of course, then there's the debt that just kind of sets you a little bit further back behind the eight ball. But to be able to be aware enough that this is an opportunity to right the ship is the first place to start. And we can go back to the first question, which was about saving. So, if one of your savings goals is to get out of debt, then you can establish your personal budget around being able to do that. So, Tiffany, the budgetnista Aliche, her book, Get Good with Money, that's probably a great place to start. I know it works for me.
Me, yeah.
I'll say that. And Rachel Rogers, We Should All Be Millionaires. So she begins with the end in mind, but along the way throughout her book, she talks about these steps to get out of debt, to bring in more income, and then these things to consider on your pathway to elevating your wealth. See?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said in the first book I have
Mhm,
read, not the second one, so I might have to write
mhm,
that one down myself. Um, but again, I think you have to start with a plan.
mhm,
And there's a lot of debt restructuring companies out there that might be able to help you depending on what type of situation you're in. Maybe you could look into that, but as well. But I would say just start with the plan and start with the plan to pay off that principal as fast as you can and potentially earn early, because then that alleviates you in some cases, depending on what type of debt you have, and eliminates that interest charge as well. But again, you start with the plan and start paying it off. And again, do your own budget to make sure you could do it and sustain whatever that lifestyle is. There was a question, that I gotten before related to what do I think is standing in the way of helping, especially Black people or African Americans, whatever, Hispanics, whatever it is, not get out of this cycle. And I think social media today is, I mean, it's always been an issue, you know, people wanting to have that purse or that bag or those shoes or that house. And the advice I have is that when you work hard, you do deserve to get something. So I don't want people to feel, that I'm preaching at you and saying you don't deserve to buy yourself those things. I would just say in moderation. I have a lot of friends along the way, or their sisters or their brothers that are in financial straits, and they got the newest car, whole bunch of bags, whole bunch of purses, jewelry, and don't have any savings. I just think that's an upside down way to live. And so you've got to prioritize reducing that debt over um, embellishing yourself. If you're going to reduce the debt in a significant way and then get back to saving and investing. And trust me, there will be a time for that. There will be a time, but I know it's a lot of social pressure. And I would hate to be coming up and be young right now because of that pressure. I know it's hard to succumb to, but I think the payoff for yourself and your generation is more valuable than that short term benefit.
Oh, you see me co-signing. I had to make sure I was muted. But I guess maybe in these last 2 minutes, there's one question. Do you have any books, podcasts, or any other learning materials that you would recommend? What about you, Dee? What would you recommend? Books, podcasts?
Yeah, I'll just tell you where I'm at with, if I'm not reading kids' books, I'm working, right now
Mm-hmm.
because of trying to help my son with my grandson. But I do read a lot. It's not specifically focused on building financial wealth, but I read a lot of Harvard Business Review um, articles, as well as listen to their podcasts. And I think that just generally, outside of everything, I think it's just made me a better business thinker, to think through and delve into, I hate to say it, good mistakes that companies and people have made that they write about. And it helps me think about how to be a better CFO or a better individual. I spend most of my time there right now if I'm not reading kids' books or reading things for work itself. Those are some of mine. And of course, Good to Great is my best business book that I've ever read, I would say.